We're days away from a royal wedding. Take one more stylish ride through London. Get all the last-minute details and the inside story on Will and Kate's relationship as we count down to their big day. A royal wedding, Saturday on CNN.
I'm Jim Bitterman in Paris, and if the French put high value on human rights, it should be pointed out that modern slavery is not unknown here.
And internationally, a recent report by the UN Office on Drugs and Crime estimates 17,000 women from across West Africa are in Europe as victims of human trafficking.
CNN has joined the fight to put modern-day slavery out of business. The CNN Freedom Project.
Learning should be fun, and that's the whole concept of Sahai.
She's an educator for children all over Ethiopia, creating a television show just for them. This week on African Voices, Ethiopian educator Ruktuit Tigaboo.
Education is the key for them to discover themselves, so we need to make it accessible for them in a fun way.
See how she keeps things informative and interesting. African Voices, Sunday only on CNN, in association with Glow.
Go beyond borders.
Hii ni CNN.
Tonight, Washington behind closed doors. How the sex lives of presidents and first ladies and founding fathers have shaped this nation then and now. Have you got any big scandals that you've got up your sleeve for the next election campaign?
We're constantly working at least a half a dozen or so investigations in both the Senate and the House.
Paul Mogul and free speech defender Larry Flynt on sex, lies and politics. And her shocking true life story made headlines across the country. Stacey Lannert shot and killed her own father after what she calls years of abuse. But the most shocking thing may be what happened next.
Going to prison was actually one of the best things that ever happened to me.
Her story of crime, punishment and redemption. This is Piers Morgan Tonight. Larry Flynt is America's king of porn. He's a publisher of Hustler magazine and author of the new book One Nation Under Sex, and he's a long-time free speech advocate. Larry joins me now. Larry, thank you for coming to my studio today.
Hi, glad to be here, Piers.
Now, how would you like to be described? Let me put it a sort of smarter way, perhaps. If I could leave you with one headline when you finally leave this mortal coil of ours, and it could either be Larry Flynt, pornographer, Larry Flynt, free speech campaigner, or Larry Speech, lifelong controversialist. Which would you take?
Much bigger than that. I always felt Moses freed the Jews, Lincoln freed the slaves, and I wanted to free all the neurotics. and I realized in the process that I've helped millions of people get through puberty. I think that's a great accomplishment.
Do you think so?
Yeah.
You think that's your lifelong contribution?
I think it's a great contribution. I have book signings. People come up to me and say, Mr. Flynt, I just want to thank you for helping me make it through puberty. I said, my God, what greater compliment could they give me than that?
Well, okay, let me try and give you a better one, because I think it's a fascinating thing when you look at your career, to try and work out from where I sit what you would personally, if you were being really honest, would be proudest of. Because you've been such a campaigner. You've been such a politically active man as well. Here you are, you're super rich, you've had this amazing life, but part of me thinks if you had your time again, could you have been tempted into a totally different path?
No, I don't have any regrets, and I do feel that I've done a great deal to expand the parameters of free speech. And I think that's extremely important. I feel the greatest right that any nation can afford its citizens is the right to be left alone. And I've always fought on the privacy and freedom issues for the last 35 years.
Why is it so important to you, freedom of speech? Why has that been the one thing you've really been so relentless about?
Because we've had it so long, it's lost its value. You know, freedom of speech is not freedom for the thought you love. It's freedom for the thought you hate the most. And a democracy can't exist without free speech and the right to assemble. And that's what Americans tend to forget. And they're born into a culture where they take all of their freedoms for granted. Well, you can't do that. You know, they can be taken away as easy as they were gained.
But what about, for example, the recent story of this pastor who came out with these outrageous comments about, well, in my view, outrageous, you may be different about this, about wanting his right to burn the Quran. And he then burns the Quran, and as a result of that, absolutely inevitably, a lot of people get killed in Afghanistan.
Well, you pay a price for everything, and the price you pay to live in a free society is toleration. You have to tolerate the things that you don't necessarily like so you can be free. And free speech is not always good. Free speech is somewhat offensive.
But what about deeply inflammatory speech? See, this is where I slightly take issue with a man's right to free speech. I totally subscribe to. I've been a journalist all my life. I was a newspaper editor in Britain for 10 years. I get this argument, and I've defended it passionately like you.
You know.
But even now, I get to the stage where I feel there must be limits. When I see this idiot talking about burning the Quran, I think there should be something that stops him doing that, because the consequences are so serious.
When I first started out, I used to buy into a former Supreme Court justice's argument that you can't scream fire in a crowded theater. Well, I think you can. If somebody gets hurt as a result of that, you can prosecute them for the act. But if you start compromising the First Amendment, you're on a slippery slope. Now, I think nothing was more tasteful than that preacher burning the Quran, or also the other preacher that was protesting some soldier's funeral where he come home, you know. I mean, those are bizarre incidents. But we can't set aside one of the most important things that the framers gave us, free speech, for the purpose of dealing with these idiots.
And you believe that it should always be unfettered, that there should never be any limits?
I don't think you put any limits. I don't think you compromise it. There's certain things in life you don't compromise, and one is free speech.
How do you feel about being an American right now?
I feel good about being American, and it's not an easy climate to feel good about, you know. But I think things can and will get better.
And if you've been running America in the last few years, what would you have done to deal with the financial crisis, for example? Would you have seen it coming, do you think? Did you have any sense as a big businessman this was going to happen?
I think I did see it coming. And, you know, we've got a cure for people that get in trouble financially. It's called bankruptcy. And I think nobody's too big to fail. And I think that's what they should have let Wall Street do at the beginning of the financial problems. Look, the average guy out here, he's got a problem financially, gets soaked with a lot of medical bills or involved in some kind of an issue that goes bad. His only resort is bankruptcy. I don't know why we should go in and bail companies out and bail banks out.
I mean, how do you feel when you see a company like Goldman Sachs, for example? Well, it's nothing personal against them. It's just they're the prime example of a company that was in big trouble because of the financial crisis, gets bailed out by the taxpayer, and the moment they get back into the money, they just award themselves the same multi-million-dollar bonuses they always did before.
But Piers, the reason why they're able to get away with that is because we do not have the financial system properly regulated. And in New York, the last rounds that they made in an attempt to regulate Dodd and those guys just sold us out again, you know. Nobody will step up to the plate.
Because, I mean, the little guy right now in America, the 10% who are unemployed, and you're talking a lot of people, a lot of Americans are really hurting. They must be watching what's happening at Wall Street again and thinking, this is exactly the kind of greedy culture that got us into this mess in the first place.
Well, that's absolutely true.
People would look at you and they'd say, well, okay, I mean, you're very expensively dressed today, you've made a lot of money out of sex. Who are you really to dictate any kind of morality to Wall Street? What would you say to that?
Well, I think morality is sometimes too subjective to define. What might be to one is not to another. Justice William O. Douglas said the same thing about obscenity. He felt it was best life in the minds of man. And morality falls in the same issue. You know, one of my favorite sayings was, they once asked Woody Allen if he thought sex was dirty. He says, if it's done right, it is.
I mean, where do your morals lie?
Hey, I put on my clothes the same way everybody else does every day, and I go to work. I'm really kind of old-fashioned in a sense. My friends are important to me.
What's your view, say, of sexual infidelity, for example?
Hey, look, I'm the first guy to defend a philandering president. I think if you can fight 2 wars and balance the budget at the same time, you should be able to sleep with whoever you want to.
So if you basically get the wars wrong and get the money wrong, and you're having an affair...
Yeah, you're in trouble.
That's big problems for you.
That's big trouble.
I mean, some would argue, Larry, that's a slightly warped morality, isn't it? It's sort of based on financial success, which suits your purposes perfectly.
Well, you know, if you're comfortable with your life and how it's going, and you're not treading on anyone else. That's why I said at the start of the show, the greatest right that any nation can afford its people is the right to be left alone. The same thing can apply to people. We got to learn to leave each other alone as long as they're not breaking the law. It's really nobody's business who's in your bedroom and what's going on in your bedroom.
So when you see, for example, somebody like Charlie Sheen, who's been the biggest news story outside of the Middle East uprisings in the last 4 months, do you think that his behavior is completely acceptable? Do you think people should leave him alone?
I think it's a tragedy the way the media exploited him. He's obviously bipolar, you know, and is in a euphoric state of a manic depressive condition. He needs treatment.
I mean, you are bipolar yourself, right?
Yes, that's why I can speak from a certain amount of authority on that.
And do you see, because he denies being bipolar?
He is. He's a classic example of someone who's bipolar.
What is the sign for you that says he is?
Well, the first thing is that you become euphoric, you know, about everything you do. And many of the creative artists, you know, over the years, if you talk to them, they'll tell you that their best work was done when they were in that zone. For this book, I read the Gettysburg Address, and I felt that Lincoln was in that zone. You know, Lincoln was manic depressive. Doris Kearns Goodwin wrote about the dark side of Lincoln, you know. She didn't make the connection with his sexuality, but many people suffer from bipolar.
I mean, Catherine Zeta-Jones has just come out and said that she's bipolar.
Well, it's worse for some people than it is for others. But the thing about it is they got a lot of good medications that can treat it. A lot of people don't want to take treatment because to them that's them conceding that they've got a mental illness, and they don't want that, and they don't want the stigma associated to it. But the best thing in the world that you can do is, if you're bipolar, is get treated.
We're going to take a short break, Larry. When we come back, I want to talk to you about how you started this huge empire.